Life does go dark for every one of us at some point, and that's when we need the faith of others to carry us. We were not meant to bear our burdens alone. Now, persecuted Christians know all about those dark times, and they've proved God's power and love in overcoming the darkness. So if we can listen to their stories, we get the strength to face the dark and see the loving face of God. When I was a student, there was a famous preacher that came to our church, and he went up into the pulpit carrying a very large Bible, and he put it down on the lectern with a great big thump, and he said, "The last year I've gone through this book and I've cut out all the verses to do with the poor." And then he held it up and he opened it, and of course it fell in tatters. Then he said, "This is the Western Bible. We've cut out all the references to the poor, and we no longer have a Bible that works." And I was thinking about that, made a big impact on me. I wonder if we've done the same with suffering. Have we gone through the book, the Bible, and cut out the references, the verses, to do with persecution, to do with suffering? And that would be a great shame if we have, because life does go dark for each of us at some point. And that's when we need God the most. And actually, that's when we can listen to the persecuted the most, because their testimony is that they have found God to be faithful, powerful, meaningful, and strong in those times of darkness. This is what this series, Dangerous Faith, is all about. Letting the persecuted, using their story to put our Bible back together again, so that we have a book that works. And ultimately, so that we find a bigger God, a more dangerous God, less safe, less predictable, less ordinary, a God free to be who he really is. And so that we would become a lot more dangerous too, as we live out a more radical faith. I remember a friend of mine who was running a bookshop in Gaza, and it was bombed one day. And I was talking to him, and he said, "Well, Ron, it was a beautiful bomb." And I said, "Pardon?" He said, "It was a beautiful bomb," he said. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, they wouldn't be bombing us if we weren't making a difference." He knew God was building the kingdom. So that's a remarkable feature of the stories of the persecuted, the way they find this song of joy through the valley of suffering. When you think of what your Bible really is, it's persecution literature. It's written by persecuted believers for the strengthening of other persecuted believers. The vast majority of it fits that category. So why wouldn't we listen to the persecuted of the world today to help us read it? Because they are the community that's closest to the people who first read and wrote this book. The Bible, let's face it, is full of suffering. Even in the first 30 pages, you've got murder, rape, fratricide, genocide. It's full of suffering. And persecution, which is a form of suffering, perhaps one of the most intense forms, is all through it. Think of the Old Testament. The Old Testament is really the story of a minority group of people, the Jews, who are always under threat of extinction because they're surrounded by enemies that want to do them harm. And still, remarkably, they manage to bring God's light to the nations. The Gospels see Jesus Christ persecuted onto a cross, and yet through that death and resurrection, he offers salvation to everyone. The epistles are really all about a church that is deep underground. And Paul, of course, who's the most well-known correspondent, he's writing a lot of his letters from a jail cell. And yet, look how he takes the gospel to the ends of the earth. And the Bible climaxes actually with this large, dense, amazing, symbolic book called Revelation. That's also written by John, who's in exile at the time. And it's all about how to keep believing that God's eternal kingdom is being built even though the beast appears to be winning. And that's where the Bible ends, with that great picture of how through the blood of the martyrs, God builds this wonderful, eternal, and phenomenal kingdom. Persecution's central to the book. I don't think we can make enough sense of the Bible if we don't really take the suffering bits seriously, especially the persecution elements seriously. Otherwise, we may not have a book that works, and we may have a God that is not strong enough when we go through the hard times. If people who have suffered see the face of God in the middle of suffering, it shows that God is there in the suffering. It shows that he's with us. It shows that he loves us. It reveals his compassion in a completely new way. We need the persecuted to put our Bible back together again.